Everyone, it's Nina Collins here at The Wolfer, and I'm here today with a writer named Katherine Heiny. Welcome, Katherine.
Thank you. It's fun to be here.
Who's showing up here from her home in Maryland. And I'm really very excited today. So I'm just taking a note on the title. Katherine is, as many of you know, and Katherine doesn't know, I'm a big reader and I only read books by women, pretty much across the board. Like I very rarely read men, like occasionally, but and when I was younger, I worked in publishing and I used to read so much when I was younger. And I would always read like everything by my favorite authors, like Margaret Drabble or Carol Shields or Penelope Lively or Anita Brookner. I don't know. And I would read all their books. But as an adult, I find that rarely happens to me. Like I read more nonfiction as an adult, like as a later in life adult. And even when I read fiction, it's rare that I love someone so much that I read everything they write. Like I loved Americana, great book, but I've not read her other earlier books. But in your case, I've actually read all your books, not your young adult books, but I picked up. So Katherine, for everyone, Katherine wrote a story that was published in the New Yorker in 1992. I just found out before we went live that we're roughly the same age. I'm 51, Katherine's 53. So in 1992, we were all just out of college, right? I graduated from Barnard in 1990. So that's pretty amazing that you published really amazing, published a story in the New Yorker in 1992 called How to Give the Wrong Impression. And it was a big splash, and of course must have made you feel, I can't even imagine. How did it make you feel?
It seemed really unreal. It was the first story I ever sold.
Wow.
And I mailed it on a Thursday, and Roger Angell called me on Friday to accept it. I didn't even know the mail worked that fast.
I was about to say email or actual mail.
And I feel like it was, this amazing thing that's still opening doors for me. And sometimes I can remember exactly how I felt writing the story. And sometimes it seems like a good investment I made a long time ago.
I actually I'd like to read the story. I looked it up and we're putting a link to it in our newsletter this week, but I can only or maybe I didn't try hard enough because I only saw the, like the old print digitized version of a picture of it. And so I haven't been able to read it yet, but I do want to read it. So in any case, Katherine published this story. And then as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you went on to have a pretty significant career writing YA novels and then only published your first adult books in the last like 5 or 6 years, I think. So the first book, the book I read was called Single, Carefree, Mellow. Yeah, and it's a collection of stories, and I absolutely love them. I don't have them with me because I'm writing in from Riverdale. I have the other 2 books, but I do own all 3. And I remember reading it one summer, and I just thought they were like perfect. They reminded me of when I was younger and was in love with like Anne Beattie, which was a really long time ago, like in my 20s. So I'm not necessarily comparing you to her, but I'm remembering that feeling of kind of like funny, flawed characters that I totally relate to and kind of sexy and like literary, but not hard to read. And just kind of, for me, like the most delicious kind of writing. And then you wrote a novel called Standard Deviation, which I read probably 3 years ago. I can't remember when this came out, but also recent, and also totally loved it. It's about infidelity. And now she has a new book called Early Morning Riser, which is coming out, I think, today or yesterday or tomorrow. Yesterday. All published by Knopf, which is, of course, hugely impressive in itself. And this novel is also as delightful as the others. And I think people compare you to people like, you can tell us, but Ann Tyler, I think probably makes sense. Or to me, kind of my ultimate compliment in this realm would be to compare you to Laurie Colwin. I don't even know if you like Laurie Colwin.
Yeah, there's the epigraph in my second book is actually from Laurie Colwin.
Oh, I didn't notice. Oh, I'll have to go back and look.
I'm a huge fan of Laurie Colwin. She's so smart and funny.
I adore her. And that really is, she is the person who your work most reminds me of. It kind of, it gives me that feeling. And so let's talk about the new book. Let's talk about Early Morning Riser, because one thing I was saying to Katherine before we started is that when I was reading your books, I actually thought you were younger than me because there's a kind of like saucy, lighthearted, irreverent, there's infidelity, there's a sexual tone, there's a kind of a lightness to the books that doesn't feel kind of middle-aged. And then when I read this book, even though the protagonist, so it's about a woman who's, I think, 27 in the beginning, and it follows her for, I think, 17 years. There's a kind of a big flash forward. It's set in a small town. The protagonist is a woman named Jane. She is in this small town. She falls in love with this sexy guy who has slept with everyone in town. And it's about how her life in this town unfolds and her relationship with Duncan, if that's fair to say. And but I don't want to spoil it, but it does move ahead quite a bit in time. But there's something very kind of mature about it to me. Anyway, I wanted you to talk a little bit about your sense of your characters in these books and time passing and being a younger woman and being an older woman and how maybe it's affected your fiction and things like that.
Well, I mean, first of all, I should say that like everything I am, everything I hope to be, I owe to Anne Tyler because she's just my hero. And so many of her books have this sort of covering long periods of time where you sort of check back in with the characters. And I think I write about teenagers a lot, and I wrote YA for a long time after I actually was a teenager. I think I'm kind of basically immature, and so that somehow worked for me. But as we were saying just before this started, that I think when you, as a writer, when something happens to you, you need a time to process it. And so I tend to write now about things that were maybe, having small kids, which for me was like 10 or 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book, in Early Morning Riser, Jane's daughter has a tantrum that's so severe, it's like a psychotic break. And that's totally based on a real life story. And I did have to lure my son back into the car with marshmallows. And he was screaming that he didn't know me. I thought I was going to be arrested. And I think it took me a long time to sort of process that and see it as funny and be able to write a story about it. So it's fun to look back on, I think being a mother of young children is probably the hardest thing in the world. And so it's nice now that my kids are older and I can look back and draw on those times and just get the sort of the funny stuff and the meaningful stuff.
Yeah, so that's a really good point that I guess you're always looking back. So of course, to me, reading them, you seemed younger because you're writing about yourself in a younger moment. So right now, are you writing something right now?
I'm working on a story collection, and the women in it are a bit older than they were in my first one.
Mm-hmm. They're kind of probably more in their 40s. Do your kids think you're immature?
Oh, I don't know. Probably. They are really funny. They make very good jokes. I like having teenagers. I'm maybe the only person in all the world that thinks teenagers are like fun.
Yeah, I did not like having teenagers. Your kids are how old?
20 and 18.
Okay, so they're becoming adults. But it doesn't surprise me that they're funny because you're really funny. Oh, but another interesting thing about you is your husband. Tell us about your husband.
Well,
I got him, and he's interesting.
He is a former MI6 agent, like James Bond, former spy.
Oh, cool.
When I first met him, he was undercover and he was under death threat from the KGB. And he told me that he was in MI6, and I was like, what is that? And he was like, MI6. And I was like, I just said I don't know. So,
I don't know what you're talking about.
So I think he only married me because I was like completely unimpressed by, and also I sort of wondered if it could be true. I was like, what are the odds that you're dating some guy who's really a secret agent? That seemed very funny to me. But and I was always scared that I was going to get drunk and tell somebody at a party.
Yeah, well, I always wonder how that works. Like if you really are involved with someone who's an actual spy, like, did you tell your parents? Like, did you tell anyone?
No, No, I didn't tell anyone. I mean,
Wow.
he had a cover job as a diplomat. So it wasn't like I couldn't talk about what he was doing.
Got it. Okay.
But once we went to a dinner party, and on the way there, we discussed what we were going to say his cover job was. And when we got there, the guy with the cover job was also at the dinner party. So we had to like extemporize, you know, crazily. But he's retired now and he's not under death threat. The KGB sent a message saying they were over it, which
really,
like high school, like we're over it.
We're over it. We're not interested in you anymore.
Yeah,
so when your spy partner is no longer a spy, then can you tell people? Like, then did you tell your parents?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay. Got it.
And now I talk about it in like every interview. So every single person in the world knows.
And your kids must think it's like crazy cool. Is he English? Is he British?
He is. He's British.
Very cool.
They do think it's very cool.
Yeah.
Maybe that, you know, like they think they have cool parents. Maybe that's why I find having teenagers really fun.
Yeah, that probably is. They like you and you like them. So it probably sounds like it works. And do your kids read your fiction? And I'm wondering if your husband worries about you having an affair, because you write a lot about infidelity and sexuality in a kind of light way that is hard to pull off, I think. Is that accurate? I hope you don't take light offensively. I mean it in the most flattering way. You have kind of like a light touch about it.
No, I think that's a compliment. I think that, well, in my first story collection, when I was writing the story called Blue Heron Bridge, I said to my husband, what do you want the story to be like, the husband to be like in this story? Because I consult him about everything all the way through. And he said, I want the husband to be older and British and a mathematician. And I was like, everyone's going to think that's you. And he was like, why? And I was like, because you're older and British and a mathematician. So I'm dealing with somebody who doesn't even make that sort of assumption. But he's so much a part of my writing. And because he's not a writer, he's so generous with his thoughts. And he's a very witty, funny person. So I think a writer like keeps all their best ideas. They don't want to share it, but he's not a writer, so he doesn't care. So it's not like I go and write a story and he reads it and is totally surprised. He knows pretty much all the way through. Okay. So yeah, I don't think he worries about that.
Nice. Okay, so he's really involved and funny. It sounds like you have a lovely family life. And do your kids read your books? You have a boy and a girl?
No, I have two boys.
Okay.
And they like to follow my press a lot, which is really cute.
Yeah, these are not really books that boys would read, I have to say. You shouldn't be offended or hurt if they don't read them yet. I'm thinking their girlfriends or wives will be super interested to read them. Not that men couldn't read these books, but they're pretty female.
Yeah, I think so too. So I think that they'll read them when they're ready to read them.
Yeah, because they're also about, at least this one does have motherhood, and they are about romantic life and sexuality, and that would probably be weird to read about your mom. And so I would imagine they like the press, and you also have really nice covers. They're probably super proud of you. What is the hardest part about being a writer for you?
Oh, I think that there are always a million reasons not to write. And you kind of have to block those out and just move forward, because if you start thinking this isn't good enough, or this isn't what I've written before, or nobody's going to read this, or people are going to object to it, or I'm hungover, or I'll do it tomorrow, there's just always a reason not to do it. So you have to be pretty disciplined, I think.
Yeah. And how does that work for you? Like, do you have a fixed schedule? Do you have a fixed place? Like, how do you do it?
Well, a long time ago, maybe when I was in graduate school, I read that Stephen King takes a walk every day before he goes before he writes. And I was like, whatever Stephen King is doing is probably something I want to be doing. So I started doing that, and it really does help. And but during the pandemic, I've noticed that I'm missing the interaction with random funny people. Like, there was, shortly before the pandemic started, I was at the dog park, and talking to this man, and this man gave his dog a 10-minute warning when it was time to leave the dog park, and he wasn't being ironic or and I was just so happy and so excited. And even though I didn't intend to write about that, that just sort of inspired me. And I was really eager to get back to my desk. And I think in the pandemic, I've really missed that.
Yeah, getting just the influx of other stories and people and voices.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And you said you're working on a story next. You know, as someone who comes from book publishing, I always feel I love short stories, but they're hard, right? And it's interesting that you're going back to stories after having written 2 novels. Is that like a palate cleanser for you? Do you think you'll write another novel next, or do you really want to go back to writing more stories for a while?
I think I'll write another novel.
Mm-hmm. I want you to, selfishly.
For years, I felt like I couldn't write a novel. I felt like I just didn't have the range or the depth, or I started my writing life as a poet, and then I became a short story writer, but it's like really the short forms were where I felt comfortable. And once I decided that I couldn't write a novel, short stories came faster than I could write them down. Like, I was freed. But then I started writing short stories that were about the same characters. So I sort of backed my way into a novel. And then I find writing a novel really fun. I mean, all writing is work, but sometimes it's fun work. And I really like knowing the characters so intimately. But there is a part of me that will probably always write short stories too.
Okay. And what do you like to do for fun when you're not writing?
Oh, I watch a lot of TV.
Me too. What's your favorite binge from COVID?
It's actually Euphoria.
Oh yeah, Euphoria was really intense. Yeah.
Well, I saw that Zendaya, is that how you say her name?
I don't know, probably.
That she won the Emmy. Mm-hmm. And I Googled the show, and it said it's about teens and drug abuse. So I was like, great. So my husband and my younger son and I watched it together. And it's so sexually graphic.
Yeah. I was about to say, did you also watch Sex Education with your son?
So we watched it during dinner, and we were all getting quieter and quieter and sort of curling up softer, into little balls. And when it was over in the end, I said to my son, I'm sorry. And he was like, I don't want to ever discuss this again. And my older son was off at work. Lucky him. And the next day he came up to me and said, Hector told me you made him watch a porn film. So, but I loved Euphoria. I watched the whole thing later by myself. I just thought it was really visually stunning and so gorgeous, and the actors are all so amazing to me. So yeah, I like teenagers. I like to watch.
Yeah, you like teenagers. There was that good teenage, it was like a less complicated binge, but I really liked it, about oh gosh, she was an Indian teenage girl. This was also during COVID. It was on Netflix. Anyway, I'll think of it later. I'll email you. But anyway, I like teenagers too. And I just watched another one recently. Oh, it's all a blur, all these Netflix things we watch. But anyway, all right. So you like to watch TV. What else do you like to do?
I read a lot. Wow, I'm struggling with this. I'm
it's okay. I have to say, you're one of these interviews that I'm really doing this just because I really like your books and I just wanted to meet you. So I just want to know a little more about you. So what have you read in the last year, and then I'll leave you alone, that you liked? Because it's hard to love books. I don't read that many things that I love, but it's true.
Well, when I'm writing, I find it hard to read fiction, because if I read something good, then I feel that what I'm writing is not as good. And if I read something bad, then I feel my writing is bad. So it's like finding the little sweet spot between like hungover and drunk, where so I tend to read a lot of nonfiction when I'm writing. And this year I read Notes on a Silencing by Lacey.
Oh, yeah. I didn't read that, but we did. Someone else on my team interviewed her and really loved that book. Really was very moved by it.
So powerful, so good. And The Body in Question by Jill Cement.
Oh yeah, that's a great book. I've read that book. I love that book.
It's like a fever dream.
Yeah, that's a really wonderful book.
And the fact that the characters only have like their jury duty numbers, but you still can keep track of them.
Yeah, it's really good. I'm actually just pulling out a book that I'm reading right now that I'm really liking that you might like. It's called Sorrow and Bliss.
Oh, I'm reading that too.
Oh, you are? Are you liking it?
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really liking it too. This is our book club pick for next month, I think. Yeah, I'm really liking it. Well, that makes sense that we would like some of the same things because I like your book so much. All right. Well, it's great to meet you. Really, thank you so much for just spending a few minutes with us. Everyone, I really, really encourage you to read Katherine Heiny. Standard Deviation, Early Morning Riser are her 2 novels. And then there's a story collection called Single, Carefree, Mellow. And she's just total Wolfer material. I don't know if you know anything about us, Katherine, but we're a community of women over 40. And big readers, really kind of smart and funny. And it's a community where we talk about health and sex and relationships and kind of the realities of what it's like getting older in the second half of our lives. And, but we cover a lot of books, and you are very much Wolfer material in my mind.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day and take care.
You too. This was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Good. Okay. See you later. Bye-bye.